Welcome back to Mind What Matters. Good afternoon, good morning, good
Good
evening.
evening, good middle
I
of the
don't know where
night if
you
you're in the
are.
middle of perimenopause and menopause.
Yes,
Happy
that's
3 a.m.
happy 3 a.m. I love that. That's our new intro. Happy 3 a.m., everybody. Nikki and I are pumped to be back with you for yet another riveting discussion on caregiving. What's up, my love? How are you?
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that was a
I'm
long pause.
running well, I'm running off of like 3 nights of very little sleep because I've been working on the show, which I'm so excited about. And it's been such a gift and such a blessing. And also, we just got off of what's called splits, where we essentially we start at like 12 and 12:30, and then
Yeah.
crew calls at 2, so we come in about in 2 hours, hour and a half ahead for hair and makeup, but then we work until like 2:30 in the morning. And then but also the thing that happens is you come home, you get to bed around like 3 or whatever, but then you have children to get up to the next morning. So then you're not actually sleeping. Um, so I'm kind of a little like yesterday, and also I'm PMSing. So
Oh.
yesterday, I just like cried so much, just random crying at the suffering of the world. Like every time I would think about
Oh, that's good
people,
cry.
and then I would just sob thinking about people not being able to get the care they need or the access to healthcare or the access. And my friend Amy, Amy, both of our friends, you guys, Amy does human design. If you haven't listened to that episode of the podcast, please go do it. And she was like, well, my love, what is going on with you today? And I was like, I haven't slept and I'm PMSing and I can't stop feeling.
Oh.
Just all the nerve endings were like this. So
I think there
I'm,
has to be something to that whole, like, not sleeping and feeling more emotional
oh my
because, well,
gosh.
not just that it makes
Yes.
you more on edge, but, like, I don't know if it's like that line, you know how we always talk about, like, the thin veil, of, like, there
Yeah.
being something else so close to us that we can't see, we can't touch. But I remember when I was trying to go off my antidepressant that I started taking when my mom was dying, that's like
Mhm.
that was the hardest part for me was the no sleep because I was fine otherwise, but it was like that day 3, day 4,
Oof.
day 5, the sleep deprivation would hit, and it was like, I think I'm going mental, but also you're just so much more, you feel like a live
Raw.
wire,
You're
Yeah.
raw.
Yeah,
You're
you
just
do. Well,
walking around.
good.
I say like all my nerve endings, which I'm generally like a very deeply sensitive. Like I walk around all the time with like every
You
like
are? You're sensitive?
stop it. With like every, neuron and everything just
I would
open to the
never
world.
have guessed that. Sensitive? I don't know.
So
I
so
mean,
like when I don't sleep, Liz, just imagine how it is. So that was me yesterday. I did get a little bit more sleep last night. I got to go with the kids to school and do chapel. That's always a great way to start the day. And I get to be here with you and talk to an amazing guest that I'm really excited to talk to because if you haven't been a caregiver yet, you will be.
that's right.
And at some point in time, one of the hardest decisions that you will ever have to make in the process of caregiving is if you decide to put your loved one in assisted living. It is one
Mhm.
of the most, it's a marker. It's a before and after moment in your life. You will never forget the day. You will never forget the moment. You will never forget the pain of the decision. And also how so many of those places are failing us
Mhm.
and why. Why? Because I know from working in healthcare, because of cuts in legislation last year to healthcare, giant, huge, massive cuts, hospitals are struggling to keep their doors open, and rural hospitals across this country are already closing. And there's already signs going up. They just did it in our local hospital back home. My grandmother's currently in the hospital. And there's a sign outside, no longer taking Medicaid. What do
Mhm.
those patients do? Where do they go? Right? How do they get care? So it's way more nuanced than we think. And we have the perfect person to talk to today that was not only within the system, but helps families navigate their caregiving journey. And I'll let you do her introduction because she's incredibly impressive.
She is. And I don't know if you know this or not, but I got to talk to her already once before while you were filming in Greece. And so we've already
Oh,
done
yeah.
on You Snooze, You Lose, DeLoach.
Dang it, guys.
I
See, I
talked to
miss out on all the fun.
no, you don't. You are the fun. In
Thanks,
fact,
babe.
even Anthony, our production guy, our team texted to say, it's so good to see Nikki back and y'all's and everything you guys do together. And I was like, wow, okay. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's like the back
Anthony.
compliment of it's nice that there's someone else besides you, you turd.
I love
Uh,
Anthony.
okay. I'm going to give her a nice little introduction again. I've done
Yeah.
it before, but
Yeah.
you guys, for those of you who don't remember, Christen Bergeron, she was with us a few weeks ago. She has spent 25 years, guys, inside the senior living industry. And just going to interject here, she told us last time, and Nikki, you wouldn't know this, but she actually, like, her mom ran an assisted living facility or was a nurse in assisted living. So she has literally, since the time she was a little girl,
Wow.
been in this world and seen it. She went to college for it, did
Wow.
all kinds of work in it along the way. But anyway, yes, 25 years inside the senior living industry. She's been working in leadership positions inside of communities and at the corporate level, where she saw firsthand how families are expected to make major decisions without ever getting the full picture. Isn't that the damn truth?
Mm-hmm.
Now she works exclusively for families, helping adult children understand what their parent needs, what it costs, how to pay for it, and what to do before they're trying to figure it out in real time. And today we have got Christen Bergeron back with us. What is up, Christen? Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
So happy to be back here. Oh my
We are
gosh.
thrilled to have you. We are going to jump right back into where we left off with you because we've kind of got a lot to talk about. Nikki, just, for your intel, so you don't ask any of the same questions and make me look stupid and bore her to death. We're not going to talk about the whole, like, how do you know when it's time to move in and,
Mm-hmm.
the complexities of the system and all that. We've kind of covered most of that. Although if you
Great.
have like a specific question, go for it. But what Kristen's really a pro on and what I feel like no one is talking about is sort of this idea of how normal families are expected to pay
Ugh.
for cost of care. And I just put out a video about this. Um, it's impossible. It's impossible for any normal working family to afford the cost of care. And now that Medicaid
Yes.
is dropping back and taking more and more away, this is a problem that has become almost overwhelming, not just for the average family, but for most of Americans. And as the silver tsunami keeps cresting, it's just going to get worse. And the number of caregivers that we have willing to do the work is going down. And the number of beds in these places are becoming less and less available.
Yes.
And I think that we're just at a serious inflection point of kind of going, okay, the current system's not working. What are we going to do about it? So,
Correct.
Kristen, let's just start kind of from the very beginning of sort of what you express to families. When they contact you, these are people who are really trying to figure it out for the first time. So, like, what's the first financial hurdle? Like, what's the first thing you tell people?
Well, I'm so happy to be back here. So thank you, Liz and Nikki. So happy to be here with you now. And I hope
Same.
Greece was fabulous.
It was fabulous.
I bet it was.
You
So
just suck. Thanks a lot for that.
I cannot tell a lie.
what's so interesting, so like you said, I spent my whole career in senior living and in senior living operations. So I started out running individual communities and then grew up through senior living. So I was an executive director in assisted living communities and memory care communities, and then started working on the regional level and then as a vice president of operations for 2 different companies. So I was very much involved with the financial side of care, working individually with families in the communities, but then also on the corporate side, really working through revenue targets because it's very much a conversation. And these are
Anytime
for-profit
somebody says
businesses.
corporate, I just want to take my computer and throw it against the wall. Continue.
Right. So I have an interesting perspective that I think really helps families. So I did that for a very long time. And I decided that families really need somebody on their side that understands senior living from the inside, from a different perspective, because there's resources out there such as nurse case managers, which are wonderful resources, and other individuals that families can hire privately, but sometimes it's missing the financial piece. And what I was able to realize is that I have a very unique perspective to be able to tell families kind of the inside information of what they really need to understand. So when I started navigating senior living and I was working one on one with families, we weren't specifically always talking about finances. We would talk about how to set their senior living plan or when to decide when it's time, or home care versus senior living. But what I really saw is the more time I spent with families, what they really wanted to talk about was the financial side. And they had so many questions about it. And so I've really started to kind of morph my focus a little bit more into educating families about the financial side. So the number one thing that people really don't understand first is how senior care is funded and paid for. So many families come to me and think that Medicare is an option that could help to support them in senior living, or Medicaid could be more accessible than it really is because, of course, there's financial requirements, there's the look back period.
Hey, whoa,
There's
whoa,
so
whoa,
much
time out.
misinformation.
Will you tell people the difference between Medicare and Medicaid? Because that's a biggie. That would be helpful.
Yes. So Medicare, really think about it as your medical insurance. So that will pay for your hospital stays. It will pay for your acute rehab or skilled nursing, home health care at home, but it will not pay for long-term custodial care, kind of thinking about the daily activities of daily living. So helping your mom or dad with their bathing or dressing or just really their day-to-day life. It's really if there's an acute need for them to utilize their Medicare benefit, it's only for a specific period of time. So a lot of folks think that Medicare will fund them for, say, their nursing home stay for a long period of time. And
No.
that's not the case. It's really only for acute, skilled circumstances, and there's also requirements to be able to use that benefit. And then Medicaid is really financially based and can help you, of course, pay for long-term care, but there are strict guidelines, of course, as you're aware, to be able to qualify. And you really have to spend down all of your funds. Typically, there's a $2,000 asset limit in most states, and then there's an income requirement as well. And that's only going to pay for certain settings. Assisted living, for example, with Medicaid, it's very difficult to find assisted living Medicaid beds. And families are often very surprised about that. So there's a lot of misconception between the two, and also about how much coverage is available through Medicaid for long-term care.
That's right. Because 9 times out of 10, well, pretty much 10 out of 10 times, if you are looking at a facility that's one of the best, that's has a really solid reputation, that is known to have good care, the chances are almost negligible that they're going to accept Medicaid at all. So that means that if you are underserved and if you have low resources, you can't even expect that you have a prayer of getting any help from the government to afford one of these nicer places. The best you can hope for is probably a state-run facility, or one of the ones that has, not as great care or doesn't have the great reputations. And to me, that just sucks. Like, is there not a more American thing than that right now? That, sorry, if you don't have, a ton of extra money, you're not going to get great care. And it makes me sick to my stomach.
Sick.
Because if you only knew, guys, if you're only entering this stage right now and you don't even understand how much, um, how much of your loved one's independence one of these facilities take just by entering into them, oftentimes, particularly if it's memory care. But even in the best case scenarios, like where my mom was, for instance, which was a wonderful facility, had a great reputation, horrible things happen. And
Mm.
so you consider that, potentially your loved one is in a place that doesn't have a good reputation, isn't rated as highly. I mean, I can't even imagine the neglect and the abuse and the things that go on. I mean, to me, it's criminal. It's one of the biggest problems that I think we have right now in our country is how we're able to treat and care for the elderly or the sick and those that are, the most in need of it.
Well, it's so interesting. Like, sorry, I remember being in college, and our professor, one of the questions we were supposed to answer in a paper by the end of the semester, and our whole grade was based on this, was, what do you think makes a good country?
Mm.
What do you think makes a good country? And we were spending that whole semester, kind of studying legislation and systems and institutions, um and at the end, for me, I said, I feel like the point of government and also the point of legislation, and what also is the measure of a good country, is how they take care of their most vulnerable.
Mhm.
And if that is the measure of a good country, in my opinion, and I think it's the opinion of millions, we have an
Failing.
F. We have an F.
Mhm.
Honestly, we have an F right now. And so, Liz, to go back, I just want to say, like, it is such a conundrum, because if you even look like a family like mine, my husband and I make a great living, right? But we couldn't afford in this moment in time to pay for around the clock care
No.
for my mother, or even talking about assisted living. That would require a substantial, like, we would have to be like, maybe we sell our house, maybe we downsize, maybe we would have to make huge adjustments. I just don't understand, like, how did we get here? And were we ever moving in the place where this was easier? And then how did we get to where we are today?
Who wants to tackle that?
Well, you're right, Nikki, and if you think about the aging population, right, and how much that is expanding and growing, and we do have a crisis on our hands, and it's incredibly challenging for families. And you're right, assisted living can often be unreachable for a lot of folks, or maybe they're able to have a stay for a certain period of time. But especially when it comes to your loved ones that have dementia, you don't know how long that journey is going to go on for.
Right.
And so families really struggle with that. A lot of families
Yep.
that I talk to, because they don't know. So if it comes to assisted living and they do have some financial means to pay for it for a certain period of time, when should I do that?
Mm.
And how long would they be able to stay? And then what would be the next step? And so you're right. Then we have the conundrum of families who are working, have their own families, trying to support home care or care for their loved ones at home, and they need to work. So you're right. We do need to do something as a country, because this is only expanding. And we know the strain that it puts on caregivers is unbelievable.
Yes.
I can't believe I'm going to admit to this, but I guess you'll see it on Instagram probably before this even airs. But when I was talking this past week with Neil about Shaw, the Care Yaya CEO, about the fact that this is just like it's a problem that someone is going to have to solve, and people are working to solve it right now. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a big slide in this like notion of the government like having this much waste, right? Because right now the way that Medicare and specifically Medicaid really is getting eaten up, because let's say, you don't have health insurance, but you have Medicaid and you fall in the middle of the night and you go to the hospital. You have an ambulance ride, you have a hospital stay, then you have a skilled nursing rehab facility stay. So you're talking about something for just an average, arm break, leg break, whatever, probably more like leg break if you're non-ambulatory, right? And you can't go back home. But you're talking about something in the hundreds of thousands for care that Medicaid has to eat up, right? Okay, well, it would make a lot more sense to have somebody, an hourly worker at your house, paying $25 an hour, that could have prevented that fall just by helping that person to the bathroom, right? But that is like one piece of it. And it's certainly the largest piece. But like, let's talk about one of the smallest pieces. This is what I'm about to cop to. Nikki, you're going to be horrified. I'm like embarrassed to admit it. Um, I filmed a video just now of myself walking through Walgreens like some sort of animal. I was like, influencers, my hat's off to you because I've never felt like more of a clown in my entire life. But I wanted to show people the cost of adult. What is the PC term, by the way, for adult diapering, like adult undergarments? I mean, most people just say depends.
Briefs. Yeah,
Briefs?
sometimes we say briefs. Or
Okay, well,
personal garments.
I personally remember the first time that I had to go and buy my mom, briefs. Sounds weird to talk about it, briefs for a woman. But anyway, I got a call from her facility one day and they just dropped it like part of their greeting and salutation. Like, hey, Liz, how are you? Can you go get your mom some, Depends? And in that moment, I was just stunned, like almost as if somebody had shot me with a pellet gun, I mean, I couldn't move. A million thoughts were going through my head, most especially, when did this even start happening? Like, why is this the first I'm knowing about her having accidents as you're asking me to go buy Depends? Like, surely she's had others if we're to that point, not that I knew about it, but it was such a, it's just one of those moments you can't forget. It's like a flashbulb memory, but most especially because it really does symbolize that somebody is going down into the end stages of that disease. And it's just a really hard cup of tea to swallow when it happens to you. But the harder cup of tea, pretty sure this isn't a phrase either, guys, but whatever, tough to swallow, is when you go and you start looking at the price tag on these things. You're talking about something that costs, let's say basically about 24 come to a pack. Most of the packs are about $25. So $1 a diaper, let's call it. How many times a day are you going to the bathroom? I probably go 8 to 10 at least. I'm not incontinent. So therefore you have to almost double that if someone is, unless you're leaving them in dirty, soiled pants for a number of hours. So you're probably going through at least a package a day. So it's $25 a day. That's $800 a month, which is 2 car payments for most families. And that's just one thing. That's not their medicine. That's not their food. It's outrageous. And yet the government doesn't pay a nickel of that. So what do you tell families? I mean, I know we're putting so much pressure on you to say, like, what's the answer? Is the answer really only that do you tell people that only have money what the answer is? Like, do you get clients that are like, I have no savings. I live paycheck to paycheck. I have $500 in my bank account. That's my savings. Like, what do you tell families that are going through that?
Oh, absolutely. And often you might have the adult child who may have some finances, but of course they're thinking about their own children, either living at home or going to college. They're worried about their own retirement, or they're living paycheck to paycheck themselves. I spoke to a daughter who cared so much for her mom last week that she set up this time that she wanted to try to make a plan for her. And she said, listen, I work full time, but I have $15,000 in the bank. That's what I have. And then my mom has her Social Security, and that's it. And I need to be able to set up some care for her, and I need to work full time. So that by and large happens very often. So a few different things. Um, the local area agency on aging is a great resource. So I always tell people to start there. If they're looking for local resources, they can help families with the Medicaid application. They can talk about what's available for seniors in the area, some that are financially, that do have financial guidelines, some that don't. So that's a resource that people can utilize. And then often they do have to look down, of course, if they don't have private funds, then they're looking to a Medicaid placement if they do need long-term care. And that can be challenging because, like you said, yes, some communities or some long-term care facilities are only Medicaid. There's certainly a large portion of them that do have a certain number of Medicaid beds now if we're talking long-term care, but they do reserve those for people typically that are internal residents that maybe have paid privately and spent down their funds, and then they access those beds. It's very difficult at times to go directly into a Medicaid long-term care placement unless you're going into a community that has a large portion, is an all Medicaid community, or maybe is just very low census for some reason.
I have a follow-up for that because last year, as many people may or may not know, right? Our administration passed what they call the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is actually really, really bad for the average American, especially when it comes to healthcare. So one of the thing is the bill delays implementation of minimum staffing standards for long-term care facilities. So the standards that have been slated, that have been required for a registered nurse, all of that stuff, it rolls back all those standards. But also, the one thing is that experts estimate that 13,000 lives will be lost each year as a result of understaffing in nursing facilities,
Wow.
which is a huge number, right? So all of these cuts are happening, including cutting 1 trillion in Medicaid reductions over the next 10 years. 1 trillion. So this is going to threaten these community-based Medicaid services, right? So for a family choosing between home care and care community, like, how does this change the calculus of that? Does this change the calculus of that?
Mm.
Because
It's a
we
great
talk about these care communities and these Medicaid communities, like, will we even have them anymore? I know there are places in Ohio that they are literally, the Medicaid has stopped paying and they're dropping patients off at a homeless shelter.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Oh, that's
So
unbelievable.
it is unbelievable, but is the reality of families right now and will be the reality unless we can kind of really speak up and make some noise and demand something different from the people that are in Washington. And I mean Democrats and Republicans. But like at the end of the day, how does that change the calculus when we look forward to, like, Medicaid already only pays a tiny amount? What do we do when it just is gone?
Well, that's why we have a crisis on our hands, right? And often people, I think, don't realize exactly what's happening out there unless they've had a family member that's gone through the process
That's it.
or they have experienced it firsthand. It's very easy to be able to sit in Washington and make these cuts to Medicaid and not realize exactly what the implications are to families that are either the caregivers or have their loved ones that either are in facilities or are
Yeah.
managing at home, but can no longer do so.
And I don't know if this like applies to to kind of what we're talking about right now, although I would imagine so. Even just dealing with your insurance to try
Oh
and
gosh.
care. Like I'm trying to get something for my daughter right now that's just like speech pragmatics, right? Like this is not a CAT scan, a PET scan, but I'm trying to get her insurance to cover it. And basically they're telling me, well, they're out of network and therefore you can't use them. You need to use somebody else. Well, they're the only people in Nashville that actually do the type of therapy she needs right now. But all they're seeing is like speech therapist. Oh, well, there's plenty of speech therapists in Nashville. And so they keep denying it. I filled out the paperwork 3 different times and I just was on the phone with the lady again upstairs, not even 30 minutes ago. My daughter heard me and she was like, Mom, you were getting kind of like ugly with that woman. And in the South, when you're not talking nicely to somebody, you call it ugly, talking ugly. And I was like, yeah, I was, because people get so frustrated, they lose their minds. They're like, this is nuts. Like you're
Because it is
costing.
life and death. Because it's
It
life
is
and
life
death.
and death. It's
And
not for me.
and
This is not life and death for me.
no, but it's
But
life and
for
death for some
so many people, it
people.
is.
And
Yeah.
they are concerned, and it's capitalism for them at its grossest point. It is,
Yep.
how much money can we make off of families and how little do we have to give back to them so that we can give billions of dollars to our CEOs and CFOs and to our stockholders and to, so they don't care about people, they care about making money, but lives are on the line. Right? Do you come across people that are enraged, Kristen? Because I gotta imagine that there's people that are scared, enraged, and how do you deal with the emotional impact?
And I think a lot of them end up just feeling helpless. And then they end up feeling paralyzed because
Yeah.
they just don't know what to do. And so they end up waiting, unfortunately, because they just have no idea where to start. Say if their loved one needs care and they're at home and maybe the loved one is resistant and they're in a situation, but they don't even know where to start because they can't even pay for it, even if they did pursue the avenue of getting them care. And so I think people end up feeling helpless and sometimes paralyzed.
Yeah.
And if you think about your experience, Liz, you're educated, you've been able to, you have experience working through the system in some ways. Of course, this is different than working with an elder, but you understand kind of how to speak to people. But a lot of people don't have a lot of people don't have that experience, right? Or you've had experience with your mom, you've gone through, right, the system.
Well, the fact that we have gone through the system, Kristen, it means
Makes
that
it
we
worse,
probably
honestly.
means that we know too much, and also that it probably makes it worse for us because we're
Does.
like, no. It's like me in a
Yeah.
hospital. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She has a pericardial effusion and she is on blood thinners. This is my grandmother in the hospital. So I'm going to, before you dismiss her, I'm going to need you to answer these 10 questions, which means she's going to need to stay till Friday and get these tests. Oh, no, you won't be releasing her. You absolutely won't. Because if you do and something happens, I'm going to bury you. Do you understand that? That is me in a hospital. Like, because I
Damn
know
it.
too
I'll
much.
have to help her. Son of a
It's a nightmare.
They hate to see you coming.
Liz and I are nightmares. Yeah, so they see me coming and they're like, "Oh God!" Like,
me with the tarp and the shovel and the zip ties behind me. Oh, geez, not
I
again.
know.
Just another Tuesday.
Yes, continue,
Okay, stop.
Kristen.
But
Stop,
you can
stop.
be an
Hang on.
advocate, right?
I'm gonna,
And you're not afraid to speak up. But a lot of
No.
people don't even know how to advocate
okay.
or
To that, I want you to talk about this while we're on this topic. So, let's talk about this cost factor right now, about what you're saying we need to advocate for. So, you've been in these facilities, you've been at the top. What's the number one thing that surprises families the most when they're looking at these care homes? Like, what are because it's not just the like, here's your little rent number, BS. Right? Like BS times 10. That's like you're just getting started. It's like the negotiating line, like in divorce proceedings or something. I mean, I've not been divorced, but I can guess like, here's where we're starting at. You get this, I get this. Like, we're not playing there. Like, and then it winds up being something completely different. Cause I remember the first time I saw my mom's monthly bill, I almost dropped a lung. I was like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Like there's charges for medication being given. Like let's take us through that,
That's
Kristen.
not incled.
What?
Right.
What did you say?
That's not included. Giving medication for them to survive is not included.
Nope. Never mind the fact they're going to forget half the time anyways. Or just stop giving them a medicine that they
We're
need.
the worst. Let's
For
let her
shits and
talk.
giggles. Whoops. Were you on a blood thinner? My bad. Sorry, we let that run out in June and it's now August and, you've just tripped. But, sorry about that.
So you're right. The starting number is one thing, right? And that might be what you see online. So that's really, and maybe that's the number that your family member, your mom or dad is paying when they first go in because they need less care and they're more independent. So what really ends up catching families off guard is, of course, unless you're somewhere that's all inclusive as an assisted living community, which is not the norm, what throws them off is how quickly that care number grows. And I always talk to families about don't just look at that first starting number, look at that highest level of care, what's included in that, and think about what would that look like for your finances if you were on that highest level of care. So you may be going in at, say, $5,000, right? But the highest level of care for, say, full hands-on care, you could be at a $10,000 price level. And we're not even talking about memory care at this point. So often families go in, they think, okay, I might have 24 months. But then as care needs change and people decline and need more assistance, suddenly now that timeline is cut in half. And people are always very surprised about that, especially when it comes to thinking about memory care, right? So a lot of families might go into assisted living. They start in what we call traditional assisted living or regular assisted living, and then their loved one has some mild cognitive impairment, is still successful in that environment, but then may need to move to the memory care program. That's at a very different price point. And of course, that comes with its own levels of care. And so people don't realize that runway, that financial runway shrinks significantly. And when that runway shrinks, they have to think about what is the next step. So if that community doesn't accept Medicaid, then what will be your mom's next placement? And you have to start planning for that ahead of time because you don't want to stay somewhere as a private pay resident and spend down all of your funds and then need to start all over and move to a Medicaid facility as a straight Medicaid resident, because it's going to be very difficult to be able to find placement in the community that you may prefer if you're not moving, say, to that long-term care nursing home with some private pay funds.
Mm.
So a lot of families think I can go to assisted living, my mom can stay for, say, 36 months, and then she'll move to long-term care in a nursing home with Medicaid. But you can't spend down all of your money in assisted living and then think that you're going to go to another community with no private pay and be able to get into whichever community you want. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. And I see families surprised by that so often. And that's hard, right? Because you want to keep your loved one in one specific place because it's better for them. It's better to not have multiple moves, and that's disruptive. But people don't always understand that assisted living communities typically don't accept Medicaid. So you have another move that's ahead of you, and you have to plan for that.
Do you even attempt to put them in an assisted living facility, or do you choose home care? Okay,
That's a good question.
for two reasons. One, um, cost. What is the difference in cost in those two? And what is the difference in care in those two in your experience?
Well, and actually, Nikki, I listened to that episode where you and Liz talked about that experience that you had with your dad, and it was very powerful. And especially where you talked about how then that you had then placed him somewhere else where it didn't have all the bells and whistles, but that they provided exceptional care.
Beautiful care.
Because it's all about the people, right? It's not about what the chandelier looks like in the lobby and what all of it looks, a new development versus an old community. Sometimes families think that they need the shiny new, right, community, but often you might have the place that kind of looks the most basic, but they have the best care. So that's another whole conversation that we can have about how to choose communities and what to really look for. And there are communities that do provide really good care, and I've worked in them over the years and run them. And of course, there are some that have your experience that you experienced about not paying attention and not giving the care that you're paying for. So it really is very individual, and it's not one size fits all, unfortunately. And it can change depending on who the staff is and what the leadership is
Right.
at the same community.
For sure.
So it depends a lot about what your mom's care needs are. And if they're at home, of course, then there's trade-offs, right? Because you don't have the socialization, you don't have some of the programs that really may benefit somebody to be able to have the structure of having the activity programming, of having the social environment. So there are things to consider there. But when you think about the setting and the financial difference, if we just talk purely financial, that's something that really can be very difficult for families to try to ascertain what would benefit them in terms of how much time will they need if they're at home. So thinking about home care, if you just have a caregiver, not a nurse, but you just have a home health aide or a nurse's aide, you can be paying $30 to $40 an hour privately for that individual, depending on what part of the country you're in. Of course, if you have a lower cost of living, you could be down to, say, $25. If you're hiring someone privately, maybe you can pay less than that, but that comes with this whole host of concerns that you're trying to manage someone.
Because you don't have them background checked or any of that, yes.
Yeah, and then they could call out sick. You don't have a backup. So that could be challenging. But really, when you think about the difference of home care, so if you're paying, say, $30 an hour, right, and you only need 8 hours a day of care, well, now you're at $240 a day, right, of just 8 hours a day. And that doesn't even think about what would be the safety needs overnight, right?
Oh, yeah.
So if you're doing the home care route, families don't realize that their money runs through very quickly when they're paying privately for home care. They think often that that could be a more affordable solution, and it can be initially if, say, you only need 4 hours a day or you only need someone to come in and help with showers a few times a week. But that typically, unless you have very significant financial resources, that scenario doesn't last for very long. So then often you're thinking about assisted living. And like I said, there are some that provide very good care, but you have to know what to look for and how to be then also kind of monitoring the experience, just which can be really difficult if you're, say, out of the area, just like your experience was, where you weren't able to be there because you were in a different state. And then you come in and actually see what's happening and it wasn't what you expected.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. I
No,
mean, and that's such a huge problem for everyone, but it's such a measure of this goes back to the ultimate caregiving problem, right? Of like how much time do you really have to provide care? And I think that's the other question you have to have to put that into the equation when you're making this decision.
Mhm.
Because if you're working full time and you're going to expect to still stay at home with your loved one, or sorry, keep them at home, how safe is that for them? How safe is it to leave them alone for an 8 to 9 hour workday and just leave a remote control in their hand and say, here, watch TV? You have to think about this from so many different levels. And I think that's where it gets so overwhelming for families. One of the other things I wanted to ask you before, I know we are almost out of time. This always happens with you. It's like the time just goes like that because you have so much information on this stuff that's so important that people need to hear and understand. But one of the things we talked about just briefly last time, and I think you need to drill down on it a bit more, is what happens when your parent, has a critical event like a stroke or a heart attack or some type of medical event that puts them in the hospital. They're disabled after that, can't make decisions for themselves, and there's no power of attorney.
Hmm.
What do you tell people about that?
That can be something that really can end up putting people in a difficult position because often power of attorney doesn't come up with families either because they just haven't planned for it. Maybe their dad or mom didn't want to relinquish power of attorney or think that it could mean something different than it really does. And then they find out that now they're in a situation where they don't have it and they don't have the decision-making ability. So if you find yourself in that situation and your loved one has cognitive impairment and doesn't have a power of attorney and they're no longer able to make kind of that decision to be able to sign off on it, then you're facing a situation where you would need to go for guardianship and work through the courts through that process because
Which can take forever, right?
it can be lengthy, absolutely. And sometimes families end up in a situation where then they're not able to make those decisions for that period of time because they don't have the legal authority to do so. So often placement decisions could end up being made more by the hospital. Um, and it can be very difficult. So have those conversations
Like,
early.
let's say your loved one is like struggling in the hospital or something, you can't even make a decision for them if you don't have that power of attorney, even as their child.
Technically, it really if they don't have that legal authority, if they don't have those documents in place, then they don't have the decision-making ability to be able to access, say, the funds, to make some of those decisions. Now, I've seen some hospitals and some healthcare organizations be a little bit more lenient on that because they realize that, listen, you need to be able to make those decisions and have that level of access. That's the healthcare side, but you're not going to be able to access, say, their finances, right? So if you don't have power of attorney and you haven't set up, say, your access on their bank accounts or be able to really look through what that would look like if you did need to access their funds to pay for care, and then now something happens and they're not able to really cognitively be able to help you access those things or make that decision, then families can end up in a really difficult situation because then they do have to go through the process of guardianship and go through the courts and be able to access those things legally. And it takes a long time.
I
So
I
it's
have a question for you. Will you do us a favor? So Nikki and I have started a Substack, And part of the reason we have started it is to be able to keep going with the podcast, doing it weekly. Guys, it's more expensive than you think to produce a podcast and to pay for fancy editing. God knows our team has a lot of nonsense that he has to cut out of Nikki and I talking every week because we shouldn't be adulting at all in life. But it's expensive. And we decided because the feedback was so good that you guys really wanted it weekly. So we're trying to do it more. But we started the Substack to sort of help finance the podcast weekly. And I think it would be awesome if you could like make us some sort of a checklist or an itemized that we could share with our listeners. That's sort of like the things you need to do. Like, these are the bank accounts you need to know about. These are the names that you need to be on of their bank accounts. I'm thinking in my head, even like you should know their cable account number. You should know their electric number, their electric bill number, their water or whatever, like all the major bills, so that their house doesn't get turned off or whatever, like mortgage. But I'm sure that there's a total like list of things that we should be thinking about that most people probably aren't. So would you mind, like, would you consider contributing for our Substack one week to kind of like give us some things that people can look through to really make sure that they've got their I's dotted and their T's crossed for, the day this happens to them?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I'd be happy to do that. And that's something that I've put together. I have a checklist document that I give out to families as well, and that families that I can provide to you too, but I'd love to be able to consolidate it because it's lengthy.
Okay.
I can consolidate it for your Substack, but even things like passwords, right?
Yeah.
Knowing your dad's password on his
Their
laptop,
phones.
right?
Yep.
Yes. So there's so many different things that people you just don't think about. And
No.
that generation, right? Your mom or dad's generation, they don't always want to relinquish any of that information to you.
No.
They're very private
No.
about the financial side,
And
and they don't want to
especially if
they
you have
yeah.
dementia or Alzheimer's, you're also paranoid. I mean, my dad walked around
Mhm.
with his checkbook in the back of his pocket. My mother could not get her hands on that thing. And I mean, like, it was in his back pocket and it wasn't going anywhere. And like, he was so paranoid about her touching his finances in any way, shape, or form. So that is so true. And also any of these conversations, whether you have dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever it is asking people to face their own mortality.
Mhm.
And it is such an emotional, hard thing to do because it's not just, I think for so many people, I remember having this conversation with my mom so often of like, she would get so frustrated with my grandmother. And I would say, you're asking her to face her own mortality.
Mhm.
Put yourself in her
Exactly.
shoes.
Mhm.
This is hard.
This is hard.
This is hard, and so that is a very delicate, gentle, and that conversation even has to be so thoughtful that you have with them of like, listen, this is a just in case, right?
Mhm.
You're doing great. You're
Exactly.
okay. We're in a good place. Like if you get ahead of it, right? This is a just in case. I'm even having that conversation with my husband. He does our finances, and I'm like, just in case you're running a marathon and you freaking drop dead. I know that sounds morbid, but like, I need to
It
be able to have access to all of our stuff so I am not lost in the sauce. And, even he has been super resistant because it's like, for him, well, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And I'm like, you don't
matter.
know. You
Right.
No.
don't know. And so
I'll have a talk with him. I'll have a talk with him.
imagine, thank you.
Like,
Imagine that person being 70
Yeah.
and not in their
Mhm.
40s and trying to have that conversation with them. It's a really tricky, tricky thing. So a checklist would be great. And then also any advice that you have, do you have for families who are going into those conversations? Is there any advice that you can give us for how to navigate those conversations in a way that feels gentle and honestly just effective?
And I always tell families you're going to have this conversation multiple times. And sometimes it's about planting the seed and then being able to come back to it. But I always say talk to them about how you want to preserve their independence. You're not looking to take anything
Right.
away. It doesn't mean by having the conversation and sharing details financially or putting a power of attorney into place. It doesn't mean that they're relinquishing any control or that you're making any changes. It really sets them up to be able to be independent longer because you have those measures in place that in case something happens, you can access things and support them. And then they're able to have their wishes fulfilled for how they would want things to go. Um, you have to really be able to share that you're doing it to be able to help keep them in the manner that they want to be kept. So meaning you don't want to go in and change anything for them financially. You want to be able to support them. They can still be independent if they're able to, but you can't be just in the dark because something happens. And like you said, then you don't have any passwords. Then you don't know what the financial situation is. And that does a disservice for the child and it does a disservice for the parent too. But it's a delicate conversation. It has to happen often in stages. Sometimes you have to have it, let your dad or mom kind of reflect on it, come back to it again. And really, when you start to have the conversations, you can sometimes see what their trigger points are because it can be different for everybody. So some people just are very private and they haven't shared financial details. They don't want their children either to know or to worry about it. That could be one piece. Another piece is that they just do not want to be able to relinquish control. And they think by relinquishing kind of what they consider control by sharing account information, by having somebody listed as a beneficiary or joint, by giving them power of attorney, they think then they're going to have decisions made for them. And that's not the case. That's not the case. So sometimes explaining what it means to say have power of attorney or to just be able to have a central place where you know the documents are or have the passwords listed somewhere, the reasons you're doing it and why, and then that you're not looking to be able to make changes or take things over. And it's hard. It's really hard and it takes time sometimes.
One final question before we let you go. If you are a family right now, because I know that our generation, the Sanders generation, it's the hardest time of your life because you're raising kids, you're preparing for caregiving for your parents if you're not dead in the middle of it. Before you get to that stage, is there one thing that a family right now who hasn't yet had to take over in terms of a caregiving situation or make those decisions at, if there is one thing that they can do, and I'm talking middle class, right? I'm talking like working families. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about families, which is the majority of Americans that are mostly living paycheck to paycheck, right? That will face this. What is the piece of advice that you could give them today that will set them up in the best way possible when they do have to make this decision down the road?
I think that they need to start doing their research and educating themselves before they think that they need to. So far in advance. For example, if you think that eventually your mom may end up having to go to the hospital and need a rehab stay, don't wait to try to think about what that would look like. Where would you choose? Which community would you want? So say your mom falls and breaks a hip and needs to go have a rehab stay in a nursing home. Know what your top 3 choices would be. Don't skirt the topic and stay away from having the conversations because you think it's so far in the future and you don't want to deal with it and have the conversations now. So you have to start planning far before you think that you will need to, and just thinking about what would that picture look like. Educate yourself about what the financial picture is of you and your family and what that could mean from a care perspective, and then look at what your community resources are. The Area Agency on Aging is an excellent resource. You don't have to wait until your mom needs care to be able to go and find out what's available there. Planning ahead of time and really starting to understand the landscape only benefits people. It doesn't mean that you're going to make a change now, but you need to don't wait just because it's a difficult time to be able to have that conversation. because then you're making a decision under pressure when things are already happening and it's too late.
And I would encourage you guys, go take tours of these places with your
Yeah.
loved one.
Yeah.
Like while
Mhm.
they're able, while things are okay, and get their feedback and say, because maybe intrinsically one place does feel better than another, or maybe a group of nurses seem more kind, or you're one of the two of you is able to pick up on something that the other isn't. I think it's really important to put yourself, into these homes, and I'm not saying for the hour tour either, guys, for like a couple of hours at least minimum. I mean, like, you cannot. The first place I walked through for my mom, it was dreadful. I mean, I walked in and I was like, there's no way. There's literally no way she will be gone in 6 months. She can't live here. Like, hard stop. I couldn't imagine it, and maybe that was my own fear at the time. She didn't look the part at all. She was still so high functioning that I was like, she can't be here. Like, everyone here is so much further down the line than she is. I was like, she would be horrified, like, not only is it dingy looking, but like the people are not her people. And that's the other thing you really have to think about too, is look around and meet some of the other residents, see what they're talking about, see what they're doing. If you have a parent that is like super smart and, had a long, great career, and that they're, still very communicative and can speak and engage with you, and you put them with like a bunch of people who like aren't even playing cards, or they don't even want to talk about what's going on in the world, despite the fact there are newspapers everywhere. Like, that's not a good environment for your loved one. You have to put them in a place where they're going to succeed. It's hard no matter what. And some patients, I mean, some families, you're going to find your loved one is willing to do those activities. You're going to find others, like mine was like, I mean, you could have told her the building was on fire. She was not going to any art class. No, ma'am. Like, not ever. And that was same goes for, the music or the wine and cheese nights or whatever they were having. Like, she would sit there, and I will never forget this. We were sitting there one afternoon and they were playing some big, Elton John song on the patio or whatever. And they had a pianist that was playing, and I was trying to sing along to the music. And I looked at her and I was like, isn't this fun, Mom? Like, isn't this nice? And she just looked at me and she crossed her arms and she just rolled her eyes. I mean, she rolled them so far and so big. I'm surprised they didn't get stuck in the back of her head. And I was just like, well, you know, like, you really hate it here. Like, I'm sorry. And I think no matter what, you're just going to have some people that are like that. But I think to the extent that you can find a place where they at least somewhat feel comfortable, it can make all the difference. And the only way that you're going to be able to get them in a place like that is if you start very early and maybe even get yourself on some wait lists. So
Mhm.
just don't wait is, I think, the main thing that we're taking away from today. Don't wait, and also don't make the mistake of thinking Medicaid is going to start taking over the cost of your loved one's care when the money runs out. Is that
Mhm.
kind of, if you had to summarize today, would you say those are the two big takeaways?
Yep, don't wait. There's no harm in wait, and like you said, there's no harm in joining wait lists. You can skip your spot if something comes up, and understand what the resources would look like from a Medicaid perspective. So there is some care available at home. It's not to the extent that you probably think it will be. And then if Medicaid would be the aspect would be the solution for long-term care, then you need to understand where that would be and what that would look like.
Kristen,
So,
you're awesome. Thanks for
Thank you.
being here again and answering all of our questions. This is a heavy topic, and I think it's one nobody really wants to talk about. I mean, I know I didn't. I avoided this like the plague for 10 years of my mom's disease. This was the last thing I wanted to think about. But especially being back in Walgreens State looking at those depends, it was like I was right back in it. I was right back in it, and I remember the feeling of just overwhelm, and not just of like what I was doing, but like what it represented, which is the end. And that's where the mortality piece comes in. And this is hard for everyone to accept. It doesn't matter that we're all going to die. Nobody thinks about it until it's happening to them or someone they love. That's just kind of the way the human spirit works for most of us anyway. Well, Nick, you got anything other than tell
Mm,
everybody to join our Substack so we can keep
Yeah.
doing this for everybody?
Join our Substack, Kristen. If there's anyone listening who wants to reach out to you to seek guidance, to seek help, where can they find you?
they can find me on Instagram at Navigating Senior Living. My website is navigatingseniorliving.co. And then I have a guide to paying for senior care that's free that I created for people that they can find that right on my Instagram. And I can also give you the link for it so you can put it in the show notes.
Perfect.
And sometimes that is very helpful, even just as a start, just to give you an
Perfect.
overview and know the basics.
Thank you
Thank you for doing that.
so much. That is
Thank you.
super helpful. And I know so many people listening are going to go and look at your site and potentially even reach out. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for what you're doing, helping families navigate the hardest of the hard. And thank you, everyone who listened today.
Thanks, guys. Till next
Thank
time.
you.